All right. Good morning, everyone. Sorry we're running a little bit late today. Got a lot of people on the call. Hope everybody had a good week, and it's sunny outside. So I know it's cold, but hopefully it'll be a nice weekend. Everybody can relax after going back full scale from a Thanksgiving holiday. We have Matt Wiltshire on today. Matt, welcome. We're glad you're
Thank you.
on.
Good to see you.
Well, it's good to see you. I hadn't seen you in a while. We usually spend the first couple of minutes just talking about how things are going, and then we'll switch over into full-scale review. How's everybody been? You've been doing okay over the last 8-9 months?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Everybody's healthy and happy in our household. It's great. I'm actually coming to you from Missouri at the moment. I am on a college tour with my oldest son, and my other son came along as well to check out the college process. So we've got a
very good. Yeah,
high
good.
school junior who's interested in journalism and came to look at University of Missouri, which was a great visit.
That is a great journalism school. I know a number of people who have gone there, so very good. So that means I'm much older than you. My kids are through college, and I remember those days. Actually, those college reviews were some of the most fun trips with my kids, just because it was usually just me and my daughter, and that was it. We would go and we'd look at a bunch of different schools, and it was a good way to kind of just spend good quality time with your child. So anyway, I hope you enjoy it. Hope it's a lot of fun for you.
Thank you. It's been a great trip already. This may be the first of many. My wife Chrissy and I, we're a blended family, so we actually have 6 kids between us. So this is the first of what will likely be many college visits. We've got 2 high school juniors, high school freshmen, 7th grader, 5th grader, and a almost 3-year-old. So we'll be doing college visits for a while, I think.
All right. Mine only took about 2 years, so good luck. All right.
Thanks.
All right, so it is a little bit after, it's about 10:04. It's time for us to start. Welcome, everybody. Again, thanks for joining us. We have Matt Wiltshire here today with MDHA. Matt, your official title is what I've got is Chief Strategy and Intergovernmental Affairs Officer. Is that right?
It is. I'm not sure what the acronym is for that, but it spells out something funny.
Okay, good. Well, I hope your business card is big enough to handle all that.
Yeah.
Usually before we start, I just give you kind of some up-to-date numbers on COVID. 595 new COVID cases from yesterday here in Metro. We are almost at 50,000 cases overall, 49,622. 1 additional death reported from yesterday. That's 366 overall. And I was looking at ICU bed capacity. We're at 9%. Everybody's being warned to be very, very careful. We haven't seen necessarily the spike after Thanksgiving. Hopefully we won't have such a big spike, but numbers just keep going up. Everybody needs to be very, very careful. We have Councilmember Rutherford on the call. Welcome, and Councilmember Hancock is on the call, so we're glad you're there.
Good to see both of you.
Let's get right to it. So, Matt, first of all, usually the first question I ask anybody is just tell us a little bit about yourself for people who don't know you. You're from Nashville, right?
I am, yeah. So Nashville native, born and raised, grew up here, went to Metro Nashville Public Schools, proud graduate of Hume Fogg High School. And my parents, Susan and Ashley Wiltshire, some folks on the call may know Susan and Ashley. They were longtime community activists, helped start the Belmont Hillsborough Neighborhood Association, and grew up in that area around Vanderbilt. My father was the executive director of the Legal Aid Society of Middle Tennessee for, I think, 30 years. And my mom was a professor at Fisk and at Vanderbilt. So come from a great place.
All right. And how did you somehow manage to work your way over to MDHA?
It was a little bit of a winding path. I know we've got a limited time here, so I won't take you through all the twists and turns. But coming out of college, I actually worked in finance for about 15 years in San Francisco and then in New York and then eventually back here in Nashville. And in 2011, I had one of those existential moments where I loved the work that I was doing, venture capital investment banking, working on interesting transactions with really smart people. But something had kept pulling me back to public service, to public policy. I started on the board of a number of nonprofits. And it was one of these moments where you're sort of making a career decision about what's important to you. And I enjoyed the work I was doing, as I said, but there was something really pulling me back to the city. This may be a theme in our conversation, but I love Nashville like some people love the Grateful Dead. It's an obsession with Nashville. And so I literally was sitting at my desk and saw an email from the Nashville Post that said, Mayor's ECD chief leaves to join the state. And this was my predecessor, Alexia Poe, who went to be Governor Haslam's communication director. And so I reached out to a friend of a friend in Mayor Dean's office and said, look, this is a little bit out of left field, but I'd love to come talk to you about ECD. I don't think I even knew what ECD stood for, but as I looked into it and found out that it was sort of the mix of business and economic development and recruitment with city development and workforce development that I was so passionate about, it seemed like a great fit, and I was lucky enough to get to do that. And so then spent 8 years under 3 different mayors as the director of the mayor's office of ECD. And we had a lot of success during that time, in particular around the area of economic development. You know, many of the companies that came during that time, Lyft and Warby Parker and Oberto Foods and Bridgestone made a major expansion in the city. HCA expanded, relocated Parallon here. LifePoint moved into Davidson County. And so there were a lot of successes, and that was a lot of fun. Sort of capped off at the end by Alliance Bernstein, which is ramping up now, and then obviously Amazon with part of the HQ2 operation. And so at the end of that run, 8 years, the unemployment rate in Davidson County fell from 8.1% to 2.0%. It was actually at that point literally the lowest of any major market in the United States. We'd had a lot of success in that area of economic development, but really realized that there were a lot of negative unintended consequences that came with that. There were some people who had not benefited in the success of the city, and one of the downsides of all that growth is rapidly rising housing costs. And so I worked with Mayor Briley to develop an affordable housing plan. And then I moved over to MDHA to help implement a piece of that plan. And MDHA had been doing really great work under Jim Harbison and the board to develop something called the Envision Plan that I imagine we'll talk more about later in this conversation. There was an exciting redevelopment, re-envisioning of 6 legacy public housing sites. And so I moved over to MDHA to engage in that work more deeply. I'd done some work under the mayors Dean, Berry, and Briley on affordable housing, in particular around the Barnes Fund, but this was a more significant commitment to go work on affordable housing, which I was really excited to do.
Okay. Well, so let's, some people on this call may know what MDH is and what it does. Some people may not know what it does. If you don't mind, kind of just give us the general overview. When somebody says MDHA, and if I were to ask you, it's like, what does it do? What does it do?
It was really a great question. I will tell you, I don't think I fully understood all that MDHA did, even working in metro government for 8 years. And part of the reason, it's really a unique entity when you look nationally at what it does. So really there are 4 things that MDHA does. The first and biggest piece of the business is we own and operate about 6,000 apartments across Nashville. Most of them are for low-income individuals, and we'll talk more about the dynamics of how that works. But we own a little over 6,300 apartments across Nashville. Some of those are in places that many of the viewers here will recognize. Edge Hill, Casey, Madison Towers, so it's really across Nashville. There are about 180 duplexes that we own, what we in a group we call neighborhood housing. So that's another 360 units spread across Nashville, folded into neighborhoods, just like any other housing that folks may recognize. So that's the first piece of the business. Second is Section 8 vouchers. It's a group we call rental assistance. Provides about 7,000 vouchers to individuals who take that voucher and secure housing in the private market through landlords who agree to participate in the Section 8 voucher program. They pay 30% of their income, and the voucher covers the rest. So if someone makes $900 a month, they pay $300. If the apartment that they have through their voucher is $1,000, then the voucher covers the other $700. So that's the second piece of the business. Each of those are about a $55 million a year business between the subsidy that we receive from HUD and what tenants pay and their rents for the apartments we own and operate. The third piece of the business is called community development. Amel Alexander and his team run that, and that in a typical year administers about $13 million worth of grants from HUD primarily to area nonprofits, mostly in the area of affordable housing, weatherization, and other economic development, workforce development initiatives. But we also support summer youth camps and other initiatives through that community development program. And those grants actually technically come, as you know, Jim, to Metro government. MDHA has administered them since 1994 under an MOU with Metro government. And that's worked really well because there is some overlap, as you might imagine, between compliance and the staff. And so that works well. The fourth piece of our business is really the one that actually gets the most attention, but is really the smallest piece in terms of staff, at least. There are 5 folks who work in Joe Kane's group, a group we called Urban Development, that administers the 12 redevelopment districts around Nashville that were created to help redevelop those areas. They also administer TIF loans and provide pilots, payment in lieu of taxes, tax abatement agreements to LIHTC developments. We'll talk about all these acronyms later, and they provide TIF loans. And so those 4 pieces, really, I think it's unique across the country to have all of those functions, the development authority of the city, as well as the housing authority in one entity. And in fact, even as we look across the country, lots of the public housing authorities, which is really what we are at the core. We are the public housing authority. Not all public housing authorities have both Section 8 vouchers and the owned and operated apartments in the same group. We do, and we think it's actually provided a lot of benefit from Nashville, just like Nashville's benefited from having a metropolitan form of government, streamlining, coordinating those efforts in a concentrated way. Having all of those functions together, those 4 key functions together, has really benefited the city in some significant ways.
All right, so let's do this. So there were a series of questions that we got this week. Everything from how do we get more affordable housing to aging structures within what we have in Nashville. Are they safe structures? What about the infrastructure? And where do we go? So understanding kind of all that, let's go back to the 4 things that MDHA does. And let's talk about them individually in light of some of the questions around it. So go back to the first one. They basically 6,300 apartments across Nashville that MDHA owns. And then you've got 180 duplexes. All right, so, and you talked about where they were. Condition where they are of their current structure. Are they sound? How old are they? Are we replacing them at times? And what's the idea of getting more? Because obviously there's a need for affordable housing in Nashville. Okay.
Absolutely. So I'll do a quick survey of the housing. So the housing is located actually in 19 different developments, essentially. There are towers, there are community, what we call family properties. The family properties are mostly 2-story brick buildings. You've seen them with separate entrances, and then the towers are like apartment towers. And so these properties were built beginning in about 1940. HUD was started in 1938, I think 37 or 38. And most of the building occurred in the first 10 or 15 years. So many of the properties are now about 80 years old. I will say it is a testament to the quality of the construction that they're in good shape, relatively speaking, for what they are. They're in really good shape. And the towers were mostly built in the 1970s, I think. And we've done a good job at MDHA of keeping them up. But it's dated, right? I mean, any housing that's 80 years old is dated in some ways. And so what was envisioned, and I'll use that word a few times probably, through the envision process, which really was driven by the residents, was redeveloping 6 of those properties that are mostly the family style properties, 2-story, lots of buildings, into this mixed income and mixed use new neighborhoods to improve the quality of life and the economic opportunities of the residents. And so you asked, what's the quality of the housing? It's modest, it's simple, but it's solid and good housing for folks, particularly at an affordable price.
All right. So I was looking at the questions coming in. There's one about Edge Hill properties. Is that one of the areas that we're talking about?
It is. So, and I trust you'll cut me off if I go into too much. I'm pretty passionate about this and can get going.
Fine.
But the
if
envision.
You see me starting to make hand gestures, that's usually a sign. Okay.
That's a good signal. Yeah. The envision process is really focused on 6 different properties. We've started it at Casey. It starts with the residents and the community stakeholders coming together to create a master plan for the redevelopment, to shape that development, not just the physical infrastructure, but what are the needed services for the residents to help them with the variety of things. And so it started at Casey, and I'll get to Edge Hill. Started at Casey, we've completed a master plan, we've gotten the rezoning done, worked closely with the planning department on rezoning, and have actually begun construction. And I can provide more details on that. At Napier and Sudicum, which was the second one, we've done the master plan, we've completed the rezoning, but we've not begun physical construction there, but we have begun to implement some programs. And in particular, there's something called the Envision Center, which is sort of a one-stop shop. I know you've worked with the Development Services Center, a one-stop shop for permitting. When folks come in to do permitting, really streamlined that operation, really made government work a lot more efficiently. The idea behind the Envision Center is the same. One place that folks can go to redevelop, to work on their sort of economic improvement, job training. There's a food pantry, places to get interview skills, et cetera. So that's the Envision Center. We've done that at Napier and Sudicum, but we've not begun any construction. Edge Hill is the third. We've done the master plan, we've completed that, and we are in the midst of the rezoning process with the planning department. It was put on hold a little bit just because of the pandemic. Obviously, it's tough to bring folks together to complete a rezoning, but we're excited about the plan that we've got on the table for Edge Hill.
Okay, so let me ask you this, and I'm sure you get this question quite a bit. Same thing that we hear from groups like NOAA and other groups that are very, very concerned about affordable housing. So let's take the first project, which is Casey. So that's, first of all, where does the money come from to do all this work? And then second of all, when you talk about the redevelopment, I know there's different aspects to it, but is the goal to actually increase the number of units? And then also maybe, as you're going through redevelopment, people have to kind of move so you can rebuild and then move back. Briefly, can you explain that as well?
Thank you for that question. That is one of the most important pieces of Envision, which is the goal is that no resident will be displaced off the property. What we saw with a lot of the Hope 6 developments, which were great developments, John Henry Hale on Charlotte is an example of that here in Nashville. The way those developments were done was we came in, folks were given vouchers, they were displaced off the site was then completely torn down and rebuilt. And what was built was nice, and John Henry Hale is great. Folks love that community who live there, but it was a really wrenching experience for folks to be forced off and for their social fabrics to be taken apart. So one of the key functions, features of the Envision process is that our goal is that no resident will be displaced. Now, I want to be careful. At times there have been where we've got a family that's in a 5-bedroom, and that's one of the things about MDHA. We're not just 1 and 2 bedrooms. We have 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom, and 5-bedroom units to serve families who really need affordable housing. And so there have been some instances where we've offered to residents to relocate from, say, Casey to Edge Hill or another place, and we pay a relocation fee to them and give them alternatives to do that. So I don't want to say it's absolute, but it's been, I think, over 90%. And one of the advantages we had at Casey is that we had some open space and some buildings that weren't in use where we could begin the construction. And so what we do is build a building and then offer the units in that building that are low-income units to Casey residents. And I believe all of the residents in these new developments that we have open, and I'll talk about those in a second, are existing Casey residents that relocate from older public housing into these brand new mixed income units. And the new buildings that we're building, and I was told not to share a PowerPoint on this presentation, but I'd be happy to send it around to anybody who'd like to see it. There's some great photos in there. Or you can just drive down 6th Street in Nashville over in the Casey neighborhood and see some of the buildings. You might miss them because they look like any other apartment building that's been built in the last couple of years. I mean, I don't mean they're not architecturally interesting, but I mean, they look different than what some of the legacy public housing is. But the residency is what's different. In these buildings, on average, each building may be slightly different, but on average, it's 40% of the units are reserved for individuals who are earning less than 80% of the area median income, and in many cases, less than 30%. It's the HUD subsidized units. So replacing what we have elsewhere in Casey. 40% of the units for that. 20% are what we call workforce housing, although I will confess that is a misnomer. Folks are working across the economic spectrum, but it's for folks who make between 80% and 120% of area median income. So your teachers, police officers, it's the fat part of the bell curve. It's the area median income. And then 40% of the units are reserved are market rate units, where we're going to charge as much rent as we can and try and attract everyone we can, and we're competing with the rest of the marketplace. But in addition to making sure that no one is displaced off of the place where they've lived, sometimes for years, we also are actually increasing the number of affordable housing units. So we're building it back on a more than 1-for-1 basis. And so, as we see gentrification across the city and across the country, really, it's folks being pushed out. We are creating more affordable housing, doing it in place in a new model, but allowing the residents to stay in the place where they've gone to church, where they shop, where their doctors are, where they go to the pharmacy, and to keep that social fabric in place. And, it takes a long time to do something to redevelop in this way, but we think it's critical to be able to maintain the social fabric of the community.
Okay, so lots of questions that obviously rise from this in terms of for the last 5 years, we've heard the number 31,000 units that are needed for affordable housing. All right. So when you talk about, it's not being built on a 1-to-1, we've got more coming. What does that mean? I mean, obviously, you're not building 31,000 new units over there to cover that, but how many new affordable housing units are being created in the new development at Casey? And is there a long-range plan? I mean, because obviously 31,000 is quite a bit. But we got to start somewhere. So how many new units are being developed over there? And then what is the long-term plan at some of the other developments?
Yeah. So first, I should talk a little bit about the 31,000 number, just because I think it can be a little bit misleading. That same report that said that we need 31,000 affordable units, if you look at the analysis, it actually says we have as many units as we need. It wasn't like that there are 31,000 more units need to be built simply to house people. It's that the cost of the housing is misaligned with the wages that are being earned by people. And so we actually have more units than we need, and it doesn't sort of register, I think, for folks, that's priced for people who are making between 80% and 120% of area median income. The problem is you have a lot of folks who are making 50% of area median income, folks who are making $26,000 a year or $15,000 a year, folks who are making even $30,000 a year, who they don't have housing that's affordable for them. And when we say affordable, we mean that is priced at 30% of their income. And so there are as many units as we need. It's really about the pricing of those units. So let me just say that. It's not as though we need to build 31,000 units, but in order to help better align the cost of the housing with the wages that are being earned by people, there's two important things you can do. The first is raise wages. And the city has actually seen some success in raising wages. When unemployment drops to 2%, the employers have to compete a lot harder for employees. And so that's one of the good things that comes out of that growth, is that wages have actually appreciated. Now, that's not true for everyone, and they haven't appreciated enough for every job, but we have seen some good wage appreciation. As it relates to housing, even though we don't need to build 31,000 units necessarily, it is a supply and demand market. So the more housing you build, that keeps the pricing down. And I will say, both because of the overall macroeconomic environment and because of the significant multifamily housing boom that's happening in Nashville, there has been a moderation in the pricing of apartments across Nashville over the last 18 months. The average price of a two-bedroom apartment has actually come down from $1,604, where it was in April of 2019, which is the peak, to about $1,500 today. So we've seen a moderation of pricing, and that helps better align wages with the price of housing. But in terms of building units, what we are looking to do is build about 1,000 additional HUD subsidized units, which are, again, for the most low income, the individuals earning the lowest income, elderly, disabled, and folks who are working at jobs that have lower wages. So the plan for the Envision plan across these 6 properties, which is going to take some significant funding to complete, is to create about 1,000 additional units of HUD subsidized housing. And I won't get into all the HUD speak, but essentially HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, has told us if we build another 1,000 units, they will provide that operating subsidy for those units. So that's the first.
All right. So the 1,000 is over the 6 development areas. Okay. So and the money to build these comes from the federal government, from HUD?
Great question. So thus far, the way that MDHA has built the units, and we've at this point opened up about 350 or so of mixed income units at Kirkpatrick Park, Boscobel 1, Boscobel 2, and some of these, this is happening in real time. A number of these properties have just opened up this year. But the way we have financed those developments thus far is a pretty smart mix of funding sources. So we've used low-income housing tax credits, which are called LIHTC. Those are federal tax credits administered by THDA, and we've utilized those tax credits as a piece of the equity. We also use, and this is going to get a little bit more complicated, but essentially federal dollars. So I mentioned that HUD provides an operating subsidy to us. One of the things, and I maybe should have mentioned this as well, up until about 6 or 7 years ago, the federal government owned all of the public housing across the entire United States. The local public housing authorities, PHAs like MDHA, operated those units, but they were owned by HUD. there was a program called RAD, Rental Assistance Demonstration, under the Obama administration that allowed local public housing authorities to take ownership of the property. And MDHA was one of 3 public housing authorities across the country that did a full portfolio conversion. So Will Biggs and Jim Harbison and Buck Dellinger and the Will Chopin, the whole team at MDHA. I'm going to say it a few times during this presentation. MDHA has an incredible staff. I mean, one of the great things is the people who work there do an amazing job serving Nashville every day. And we're lucky to have the staff at MDHA. But that team did a full portfolio conversion. So MDHA now owns the land. Now, we can't just sell it, right? It wasn't, here's the land, do with it what you will. It was, there are land use restrictions that require it to be affordable housing. But we own all of the property across the public housing in Nashville. And so the payment for the operating subsidy shifted in a way that's a little bit of a mix. But we actually generate what appears on paper to be a profit of about $6 or $7 million a year, sometimes $8 or $9 million a year. That's really the sort of capital funding piece of that funding from HUD. So that's our profit that we plow back into building more affordable housing. So the mix of funding has been low-income housing tax credits, our effectively capital operating subsidy from the federal government. Also, there's something called CITC, Community Investment Tax Credits, which is a state, essentially low interest debt program that we utilize, and then just borrowing from banks. I mean, one of the great things about creating in a mix of incomes is we're building units that we're being able to charge higher rents for. And those units can support debt because they generate more of a profit, just like any other housing development across Nashville.
Okay, so go back, so I get that part, but talk about, because you said something that I really hadn't thought so much about, but I often wonder, and it's when we talked about the 31,000 units, and then part of what you're saying is that we have lots of space. We may not have 31,000, but we have lots of space. It's that I would say it's priced out of the range of what people can afford because the wages are too low. So the pricing of so if you drive around town, particularly with the boom market over the last 10 years, where you see thousands of apartments being built, all these things downtown. And, I'll drive around and I'll look and I'll try to figure out, are all those things rented? And it doesn't look like they're all rented. So there is a lot of housing. Again, I'm not sure if it's 31,000, but we got stuff. So let me kind of switch over to Section 8 vouchers, which is a program you said for 7,000 people that they pay 30% of their income for housing, and then MDHA picks up the rest. If there are housing units available that aren't being rented at this point, how come we can't add to that and get more people in the housing? How does that work?
Great question. Essentially how that program works is we get a budget authorization from the federal government. They say, you guys have $52 million that you can spend on Section 8 vouchers. And Norman Deep and his team in rental assistance have vouchers that they give out to folks. And once you have a voucher, you have that voucher. And you can use it so long as you continue to meet the requirements of the program. If you earn too much money, then you price out of being able to get the subsidy. But once you have that, you have the voucher. And so that creates some complications, because if you give out as many vouchers as you can, and then the folks' wages drop, you're going to be spending more than $52 million. So this is a little bit one of the things that happened with the pandemic. Lots of folks who had Section 8 vouchers, their wages dropped. And so this is actually a really important point that I hope the viewers can take in. MDHA is unique because we, the residents at public housing or who utilize the Section 8 voucher, can recertify their incomes and actually are required to recertify their incomes. And so if their wages drop, as lots of folks did during the pandemic, they still only pay 30% of their income. And so they're able to stay in their homes more affordably than just the marketplace generally. And so Section 8 vouchers are really an incredible tool to help folks, as their incomes rise and fall, be able to remain in affordable housing that same unit that they're in remains affordable as their incomes fluctuate. And we really, of course, hope that most folks' incomes rise, continue to rise, and then move out and find other housing and open that spot up for someone else. But the answer to your direct question, which was why can't we just give out more Section 8 vouchers, is there's a budget authority limit that's set by HUD. One of the things that the Biden administration has talked about is potentially expanding or fully funding Section 8 vouchers. And trust me, we've got a great team that if there's more budget authority, we will be able to hand out more vouchers and more folks will be able to get housing. I will say, though, the other piece of this that you mentioned is making sure that we have landlords who are willing to participate in the Section 8 voucher program, because they do limit their rents. In other words, you can't just take a Section 8 voucher to the fanciest, newest apartment and get, move into a $10,000 a month apartment. The landlords have to agree to the rent limits that are set by the federal government. And given the housing boom in Nashville, one of the problems we had was that landlords were withdrawing from the program. They're willing to maybe take a little bit of a discount, but when the gap gets too big, they're like, man, I just can't afford to do it anymore. I'm giving up $400 a month on each unit. And so it is, these things are all dynamic markets that you have to adjust and fluctuate. And so it's complicated to run, but the team does a great job.
But I guess that the question would be, obviously we're in such a weird period of time right now. We don't know what it's going to look like on the other side of this thing. But if there are, if there are lots of apartments out there that are available, but yet landlords are not willing to take, and I know some people, Section 8 housing sometimes gets a bad rap, but it's a voucher program, and it's actually paying for people to live. And, if apartment owners can't rent their apartments, and we've got people who need apartments. So I guess, tell me, what is the cap? What is the cap on, and it may fluctuate, but in Nashville, on a Section 8 program, how much money are we willing to pay? And that includes the 30% plus what MDHA picks up to the federal program.
Yeah, there's a tier, and I don't know them off the top of my head, but there's a tier for 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, and it changes each year. I'll see if I can't pull that up while we're talking, but I think I want to say it's about $1,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment, but let me get you a specific answer. Okay,
while you're typing, I'll ask you another question you may have to look up. What is for Section 8 housing for a voucher program? There are 7,000 people on it. What's the wait list? Do you know?
It is fairly significant. The way we operate wait lists are different for each of our properties and for rental assistance for the Section 8 vouchers. And there are several thousand folks who are on the wait list across all our wait lists.
Okay, so let me ask you this while you're looking it up. Okay, so let's say that there's this tier rate, and we've got, it's maybe $1,000 for a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, or whatever. If Metro wanted to supplement that to make it even more beneficial for landlords to take it, has that been tried before, or could we do it?
Yeah, so other communities have supplemented the Section 8 their community Section 8 program, and we could do that. There are federal regulations, and it'd be a little bit complicated, but we're smart folks, and we can work through that. I mean, I will say absolutely is the short answer. Metro already does participate, and in addition to just I'll say the basic vouchers that we have, which are the housing choice vouchers, HCV, where the tenant receives a voucher and then can take and find an apartment that accepts a voucher that they like. We also have what are called project-based vouchers, where a particular development has 100 vouchers that are attached to that development. Those are our basic vouchers, the HCV and the PBV. There are also a number of other vouchers that the VA funds for veterans who are experiencing homelessness, and other specialized vouchers. We actually provide 18 vouchers every month to the Metro Homeless Impact Division in order for them to help house individuals who are experiencing homelessness. Metro does participate through some incentives that they provide to landlords to participate in particular, the housing of veterans experiencing homelessness, so-called VASH vouchers. And so Metro already does, and we should say thank you to Metro for helping to fund that. These are landlord incentives for landlords who might be a little bit nervous about a veteran experiencing homelessness and what the risk might be to their property or the overall impact. These are some incentives to help landlords come into that program. And so, yes, the short answer is we already do work with Metro to help expand the voucher program, and we would certainly love to do that more. This is a little bit off the current topic, but Metro is helping to build some of the housing. We can talk about Randy Rogers or the permanent supportive housing for individuals experiencing homelessness that Metro is building. So there is a good partnership already between Metro government and MDHA, and we would love to find ways to expand that if the funding were available.
All right. So obviously there's lots of different things that are going on, different types of vouchers, different type of programs. I know every so often there is this, you kind of open up the window where people can apply for housing. If someone were either on this call or, you get a call from someone who's going like, I need some help with trying to understand the process, what's the best way to get to take a set of circumstances and then come into the system and go, okay, this is what I've got. What are the possibilities? What is the best way to figure this thing out?
Yeah, that is a great question, because it is complicated. There are a variety of resources out there, but I mentioned the Envision Center earlier. We are actually hiring a housing navigator at the Envision Center, and I think having that sort of navigator to help folks navigate the various alternatives out there will be a real asset, and I can share information with you about that when we get that person in place. We've got a couple of housing navigators today, and so you certainly can call MDHA, and we can help anybody out there who's looking for housing navigate the various alternatives that exist.
So the best thing to do is just call MDHA and say, I need help.
I need help. Help me figure it out. And there are going to be various wait lists, and those wait lists open up. And so we'll say, okay, look, when the wait list, would you want to live at Edge Hill? And someone say, no, I live in Madison, so it wouldn't be, I work in Madison. It wouldn't make sense for me to live at Gurnett Tower, even though I'm elderly and I might qualify. It is complicated, and each individual is different. And this is an important point. The needs, the community, the connections that each individual has is different. And so we don't want to create a one size fits all for everybody, but we can help individuals navigate their needs and help them find a place that works for them.
Okay. Lots of questions are coming in, which is exactly what we like.
I tend to cause more questions than I answer, I feel like sometimes. So I'll just apologize for that.
Well, that's okay. No, that just means that sometimes we'll just have to ask you back.
All right,
fair enough. The questions, and then we make the questions harder, and then we ask you back.
Right. Only ask me the easy ones, Jim.
Only ask you the easy ones. So
right.
Okay. So here's one that could be easy, could be hard. So with all the building and stuff that's going on in Nashville, do you all keep track, or does somebody, maybe the realtors do it, of the number of available apartment units that are currently actually not rented in Nashville by month? Do we know that?
I think that GNAR, Greater Nashville Area Realtors, or the GNAA, more likely the Greater Nashville Apartment Association, has that data. I don't know it off the top of my head. I know, landlords probably want to be a little bit careful about sharing some of that information. They don't want to seem like no one wants to live in their building, but I do believe that there are some market sources available to track that data. We at MDHA don't do it. We track the availability of our own units, which, as you might imagine, is fairly scarce because we turn those units as quickly as possible. But for the broader market out there, I think GNAA is probably the best source of that, or some of the private sources may have that information as well.
Okay, so another difficult question, or maybe easier question, but for people who need affordable housing, a wait list, how do you determine, are there priorities about who would be, if something opens up, an apartment opens up, who's next? I assume there's a waiting list, but do you score based upon certain parameters to be where you are on that priority list?
No, it's mostly a first come, first serve. We really don't want to get into picking and choosing folks, so long as folks qualify. Now, there are some requirements. Obviously, you can't get a new apartment in public housing if you're making above 80% of area median income. And there are some vouchers I mentioned that we give out that take priority to help rehouse individuals experiencing homelessness. Those are 18 vouchers that we do each month on the Section 8 program. But for the most part, we're just going down the waiting list and contacting folks and figuring out who's next on the waiting list, as opposed to picking and choosing.
Okay, all right. Got another question about crime statistics in areas, in some of the properties that you take care of. I know sometimes it gets a bad rap too, but improvements, particularly with some of is there some focus on in the redevelopment areas about making sure that people are safe, and what can you say about that?
Absolutely. So I mean, that's one of the great success stories, early success stories at Casey, is that over the 2 years, 2018, 2019, crime dropped significantly in Casey. Actually, violent crime dropped more than 40% at Casey at the initial stages of the redevelopment process. And that happened for a variety of reasons. But I think it is not a surprise to anyone that when a community chooses to invest in a particular, when a city chooses to invest in a particular community, that community responds, and the Casey community really has. And that response has showed up with a reduction in crime. Now, it is not linear. It is not absolute. I don't want to sort of oversell things. There certainly are challenges that happen at Casey, just like there's crime that happens all across the city. And that is an awful and heartbreaking thing. But we have seen a significant reduction in property crime and in violent crime at Casey as we've done this redevelopment. The other factors, we actually have a partnership with Metro Nashville Police Department. And let me say congratulations to Chief Drake, a great appointment for the city, and optimistic for his leadership and what that will mean. We have a really strong partnership with him, and I know he believes in community policing. We've been doing that. We have partnerships where we actually pay Metro Nashville Police Department to have police officers just not in their cars, but on foot, walking around amongst the community, getting to know the folks who are living there. And it's everything you would think you would see. It's residents coming up and saying to police officers, "Hey, look, I don't want to say anything, but like, you see those 3 guys over there? Like, they don't live here. They don't live here. And I don't know what those guys are up to." And so you see the community stepping up and taking more active leadership in the safety and security of their community. And that is just what happens in every community, suburban, urban, rural. When folks feel that there's an investment, then they're not ignored, they're not forgotten. They take ownership of their own community, and we've seen that at Casey, and we believe that that's one of the real advantages of something like the Envision program.
Well, so I've seen it at Casey, just talking to the folks there, and not necessarily being part of the redevelopment efforts, but just talking to folks, and particularly the feeling that people who live there are involved in the redevelopment process and feeling like this is what we want. So there is, understand that, and I think that's really, really important.
Thank you for saying that, and thank you for being connected to the community. I mean, it's really important. Thank you.
Sure. Well, that's what I think we're supposed to do.
That's what you do. Right. No, that's what you do.
All right. So tell me about, because we're almost out of time, I'm going to hit on that third aspect, the community development part.
Yeah.
Grants and other things that you're involved in. Tell us a little bit more about that. What does that mean overall? And then I'll add one piece to it as you're talking about it, because I think this is, particularly for people who are on the call, it's fascinating, all the different aspects to it. And I know that people are concerned about affordable housing, and it's such an important issue. How do people who are on the call, who want to get more involved or want to understand it better, how do they become a part of this process? So that's tied sort of to community development.
Yeah. So the community development program actually has sort of 4 or 5 major components to it. There are community development block grants. There is ESG, emergency solution grants, which are targeted at individuals experiencing homelessness. There's HOPWA, housing opportunities for persons with AIDS. And there are, as I said, a variety of other programs. MDHA generally does not expend those funds ourselves. We are generally administering the programs and awarding those funds to area nonprofits who are doing the great work. And so any nonprofit out there that's interested in participating in one of these programs, please contact Amel Alexander, the community development group, Treva, the whole team over there, Angie. They do a great job with administering these grants, and as I said, there are a variety of different grants that we can help fund. And so those funds on a year-to-year basis are generally, I think, in the sort of $12 to $14 million a year. The CARES Act money, much of the CARES Act money has actually come through the community development. It's sort of an expansion of CDBG, an expansion of ESG. So those guys have been very busy this year. And so any area nonprofit, they put out an application process, RFA, requests for applications, where nonprofits can apply to receive grants. And there's individual programs. So it may make sense for a nonprofit to participate in one RFA, but not in another. And we'd have to have a whole conversation just about the various opportunities, probably to give more detail on that. But they do a great job reaching out to stakeholders, reaching out to the community and asking the community, hey, because actually, and I should say this, not unlike the Envision plan, they aren't just sort of making this up in an ivory tower. They actually go through and create a 5-year action plan that's driven by input for the community. Here's what we really need. And so then they structure the programs to meet the needs that are expressed by the community for those grant programs. And there's an annual plan, and then there's a 5-year plan that's really driven by the community.
So if people want to look at those things, go to the MDHA website.
MDHA,
they're all sitting there.
MDHA website, the 5-year action plan, and then get on the distribution list for when we send out RFAs, so that you can participate in those processes.
Okay, so we just have a few more minutes. A couple more quick questions. Barnes Fund.
Yes.
Tell me how the Barnes Fund connects to MDHA, or does it? How does it work?
Yeah, so I should mention I grew up going to Edge Hill United Methodist Church. So Bill Barnes was my pastor growing up. And in many cases, recipients of Barnes funding may also get a low-income housing tax credit and then take advantage of the program. And I do want to talk about that, the low-income housing tax credit pilot program that you and the council created. That has been an absolute home run. And when you talk about 31,000 units, that's an important thing to talk about. But let me just answer the Barnes Fund question real quick. The Barnes Fund, funded by the Metro government, by the operating fund, provides funding to nonprofits. It's a part of the capital stack. When you're building a unit, but you're not going to generate very much income from the unit because it's going to be affordable to someone who doesn't make a lot of money, you have to really get your costs down and get supplemental funding. And the Barnes Fund provides some of that gap financing to fund these units. And in some cases, those units are accepting vouchers from folks. And so that's where MDHA voucher would come into play with a unit that was built with Barnes funding. But in general, the answer to your question is we work very closely with Hannah and the folks in the mayor's office to understand where housing is needed, where it's being built, how those things can tie into the transportation network, et cetera.
Okay. All right. There was another question that came in. Well, you're going to answer something else before I get to the last question.
LIHTC pilots.
The pilots, yeah.
I do want to talk about that. So private developers, both for-profit and nonprofit, have been building a tremendous amount of affordable housing in Davidson County, to the point that the state is actually taking some actions that make us less attractive for the funding of LIHTCs, sort of a double-edged sword. But over the last 5 years, there have been 4,442 units of LIHTC housing that have been built. About 2,500 of those units are open and about another 1,900 are still under construction. But that's 4,442 units of affordable housing created in Davidson County just in the last 5 years. And many of those units would not have been created were it not for the LIHTC pilot program that this council created. You guys did a great job. So I used a lot of HUD speak earlier. I'm now going to get into try and pretend like I'm my father and my sister, who's also a lawyer. There's a case called the Spring Hill case in Tennessee that said if you receive a low-income housing tax credit, that value of that tax credit actually has to be factored into the value of your property. So for property tax purposes, we actually tax credits for low-income housing, affordable housing developments, which seems crazy on the face of it, but it is what the courts found is required under the Tennessee Constitution. And so the council created a pilot program, a property tax abatement program, to help eliminate the cost of the property taxes for these low-income housing LIHTC properties. And so the council has had these pilots. And as a result, we now have low-income housing affordable housing properties built with low-income housing tax credits in 13 different council districts across the city. And when you talk about 31,000 units, there's 4,400 just in the last 5 years. It's huge progress. And again, I just want to emphasize, it's all supply and demand. And so, even a really expensive build, supply and demand, as we see so many folks wanting to move to the city that you guys have helped create.
Okay, so it's 10:59. I got time for one more question, which is the biggest one, and we may just have to keep going with this one. Avi Postler has it, and it's basically saying, what should we be doing? What can we do from the state legislature standpoint, if anything, in an annual allotment of certain amount that goes in the Barnes Fund? We can't, I know there's a lot of stuff going on, but what should we be trying to do to get this thing in better shape?
You are exactly right. There is no one silver bullet. There are a variety of folks who are working on this challenge and doing a great job, and I applaud all of them. But if I'm going to make one ask, I work at MDHA. I'm going to make one ask, and that is this council has funded the creation of 100 mixed income units at Randy Rogers, which is just north of the Kroger on Rosa Parks Boulevard, across from Worthing Lofts, just south of Cheatham Place. And that came through capital spending fund dollars, the capital spending plan. And that is a very tangible and we think very successful example of the city government partnering with MDHA. And I hope that we can demonstrate that that was a wise investment for the city to make. And I know there have been lots of challenges for the city and city finances, but as the city is considering making capital investments in long-term assets, I would encourage you to take a good look at what we're doing at MDHA and funding the Envision program in particular. And here's the piece of this. I've sort of referenced it, but if the city makes an investment in building these mixed income housing units, we're then able to attract federal dollars for the federal operating subsidies to operate those units. And so the leverage that the city gets on making this investment, you create a safer environment. You create a more attractive place for folks across the economic spectrum to live. And you also create a city where folks are living together. I think one of the real challenges, not just in Nashville, but across the country, is we've become so polarized. And part of the reason we're so polarized is that we've self-selected and we live in different places. And you just live around people who look like you or act like you. But one of the great things about the Envision plan and creating mixed income housing is that it creates an environment where folks live together who may come from different backgrounds or who may make different amounts of money or live and work in different jobs. And I think that investment by the city in the built environment, but also in helping create an opportunity without forcing anyone to do anything, but just creating the opportunities for folks to live together and around each other is a really great thing for the social fabric of our city, in addition to the physical infrastructure of our city. And so when you're considering your next capital spending plan, take a look at what we're doing over at MDHA, and I think we've got a great track record of success thus far. And let me say thank you. I believe Commissioner Coleman is on this call. I don't know if there are other MDHA commissioners on, but I know Commissioner Coleman is. And let me just say, we have an all-star board. I said we've got an all-star team. We've got an all-star board as well. Former Mayor Purcell is on there, Commissioner Coleman, Aoli Ansari, who's done development of military housing, privatization of military housing, Emily Faden, who is a national expert in affordable housing policy, particularly around land use, Kay Bowers, who ran a community development corporation, has done affordable housing, and two of our commissioners are residents, Antoinette Batts and Bishop Campbell. We've got an all-star board, and so I hope the board and the staff can give the city the confidence to make an investment in what we're doing over at MDHA.
Well, Matt, I appreciate your time. This has been really, really interesting. Hopefully everybody's enjoyed it. We may go back, I have to go get the cliff notes on this and read the acronyms, but it's been
Right.
very interesting. I would encourage everybody to go take a look at the website and get the reports. And who knows, we may have you come back next year and ask more specific, answer more specific questions. But this has been great. Thank you for your time. Good luck on your college trip. I will tell you next week, for people who are interested, after getting tremendous amounts of good feedback when we had Carol Busey, the Metro historian, on the call, we're going to have Ken Oliver on the call next Saturday. He's the director of the library system in Metro, and we're going to ask Kent to talk about all the interesting things they may have that you all don't know about in the library that you can go find. So anyway, Ken Oliver will be on next week, and then the following week, and Matt, this is probably important for you to know, we will have a very jolly fellow from the North Pole. Santa Claus will be my guest. And so I would encourage everybody to sign up and get children on, because we'll be taking questions from children for Santa Claus. Anyway, be safe. I know numbers are up. Everybody be very, very careful. Enjoy your weekend. Have a good week coming up. Hopefully we'll see you next week. Matt, be safe. Thank you for your time.
You too.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor.
All right. Thanks, everybody.